All right, so section 0.2, we have two types of factor. Okay, difference of two squares, which is usually two terms, and there's a minus sign in between. That's kind of like the easy way to figure out that it is one of those things. So it's just two terms. And then common factors, which is also one of the easier types of ways to factor because all you're looking for is something they have in common. Okay, so it's nothing that's like incredibly difficult today. There's no like crazy method for common factors. For a difference of two squares, there is a definition. Okay, so let me write that definition down for us here. We'll start with that. So difference of two squares. So when it comes to the difference of two squares, you're going to be given some type of function that you're going to have to rewrite as something squared minus something squared, right? A squared minus b squared. Okay? So you're going to have to rewrite it in that form. Notice it's two terms with a subtraction in the middle. That's why they call it a difference, because it's subtraction. And two squares because it's something squared and something squared, right? So it's two squares and a subtraction. So difference of two squares. If you can write your factor or your expression like that, then you automatically will go a minus b times a plus b, and that's going to be your factor. And that's it. You don't have to do anything else. Your factor will be done at that point. Now remember, sometimes you may have to take out common factors first, but when it comes down to just doing the factoring of a difference of two squares, it's pretty straightforward. So we're going to do two examples for this type of process. Okay, one that's easier, one that's a little bit more difficult, and then we'll move on to common factors. So here we go. So example number one. So we're just going to factor. And here's part A. We'll do v squared minus 4. Okay, so v squared minus 4. So what we want to do is we want to try to rewrite that as something quantity squared minus something quantity squared. So I'm going to start with this. So what squared is v squared? What do I put in that first parenthesis? What squared becomes v squared? Huh? Well, there's a 1 there, but we don't actually have to write it, though. It's just a letter, right? Just v. Excuse me. So it's just v. V squared is v squared. What squared is 4? 2. So all you have to do is write v minus 2, v plus 2, and you're done. Okay? So you're done at that point. Pretty easy. Okay? Now, how can they make it more difficult if they wanted to, which they are. They're going to give you a couple that are more difficult. So I'll give you one like this. So 5x squared minus 20. Now the first thing you should do is take a really good look at it and say, there is something they have in common, right? What does 5x squared minus 20 have in common? What number? A 5, right? So we're going to take out a 5. And then I'm going to write x squared minus 4. Okay? And now I'm only going to pay attention to this little piece right here. And I'm going to try to rewrite that one. Now remember, that 5 is still important, so I'll highlight it just so that we don't forget about it. Okay, but that 5 is still important for what we're doing. But I only want to work with the x squared minus 4. So something squared minus something squared. So what squared is x squared? Just x. What squared is 4? 2. So That x squared minus 2 squared, I can write it as x minus 2, x plus 2. But don't forget about that 5 that comes in, that was up on top originally. So here's your final answer. Now I'm going to give you one more problem that is not on your homework, okay? But it's going to be something similar to your homework. And then we move on to common factors, okay? Because notice this first one that we did, part A, it was just set up for us to rewrite it and factor. No problem. We didn't have to factor out anything they had in common or anything like that. Part B was set up so that we would say, okay, here's a number. Let me see if I can take that number out and rewrite it, which I did, x squared minus 4, when I took out a 5. And then I said, let's factor the inside portion only. Okay, so that was that situation. But there's other times when there's a lot of numbers in both sides, but you can't factor, not a greatest common factor. So you may have to just go ahead and do the difference of 2 squares. So it's going to look something like this, maybe 4y squared. Let's say minus, I'm trying to think of a number here. That. So 4y squared minus 49. So usually when you see a lot of numbers, you think, okay, maybe I can factor something out. But 4 and 49 do not have anything in common other than a 1. And you don't want to factor a 1 out. That's just a waste of time. Okay? They don't have anything in common. So then you got to say, well, do they have a way of writing them as squares, right? So let me put something squared minus something squared. What squared becomes 4y squared? 2y. And what squared becomes 49? A 7. And there you go. We have those pieces that go inside of the factor. So I'm just going to write 2y minus 7, 2y plus 7. And that's it. So sometimes you don't need to factor anything. Sometimes you will need to factor something out first. Or other times it looks like you might be able to factor something, but you can't, so you just go ahead and do the process. So you're going to have 3 different types of problems you might see on your homework, okay? Or not might, you will. You'll see these 3 different types. Some of them you'll be able to factor out a greatest common factor first. Some of them you won't be able to at all, and just kind of go straight into the difference of 2 squares. All right? So that's the first 6 problems of your homework, okay? They're going to look something like that. The next 6 problems of the homework are just common factors. Okay? So, factoring common factors. So we'll do 2 of these, and then I'll give you guys the homework. That way you can hopefully try to get it done before the period's over. Okay? So there's no there's no formula for factoring out common factors. You just got to look at it and say like, okay, it looks like these have the following in common. Okay? So let's try one like this. This is example number 2. We're just going to factor. Okay, and here's the first one. 16 plus 8k plus 48k squared. So if you look, they don't all have the same variable, right? 16 doesn't have a letter k. The other ones do, so like, yeah, you can factor out a k for those 2, but you got to be able to factor out a k for everything. And they don't all have a k in common. But in terms of numbers, what numbers can I factor out of 16, 8, and 48? An 8, right? I can take an 8 out. So I'm going to take an 8 out. And what's left on the inside is a 2, because that's what 16 divided by 8 is, plus a k, because I removed an 8 from the 8k. And then 48 divided by 8 is 6k squared. And there's your common factor. Okay? So we just factored out an 8 and wrote out our solution. And this is pretty straightforward. This isn't supposed to be like a really tough problem. Now, if they're going to try to make it a little bit tougher, they might give you a problem that looks a little bit more like this. So let me see. We'll try 27 n to the 4th minus 6n cubed minus 24n squared. So we look at variables first. Do they all have a variable in common? Yeah, the letter n, right? How many n's do they each at least have? 2 of them, right? Because n to the 4th has 4 of them. N to the 3rd has 3 of them. N squared has 2. They all at least have 2, right? So I'm going to put, excuse me, I gotta drink something, but let me put, all right, so n squared is what they have in common. Now, do they have a number in common? 27, a 6, a 24, what number do they have in common? A 3, right? It's not as obvious, but yeah, 3 goes into 27 9 times, 3 goes into 6 2 times, 3 goes into 24 8 times, right? So they have a 3 in common. So I'm going to take that out as well. Now let's start dividing out, right? So 27 divided by 3 is 9. N to the 4th, if I take away 2 n's, I get 2 left. Whoops, sorry about that. That's n squared. Okay. Minus, then I get 6 divided by 3, that's 2. And n to the 3rd divided by n squared. So in other words, I have 3 n's. I'm going to get rid of 2. I have 1 left. Minus 24 divided by 3 is 8. And n squared divided by n squared. So I have 2 n's and I take away 2 n's. That means there's no n's left. So there you go. You're done. Okay? And that's it. So this is what your homework is going to be like, guys.